Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm really glad you're joining us because today we are plunging into something that is going to completely change how you view the words you speak.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
And the contracts you sign or, even the thoughts you keep entirely to yourself.
Yeah, because usually when we think about language, there's this baseline expectation of it being a purely functional tool. It's like a hammer.
Right. A tool.
You pick up the hammer of English or Spanish or whatever, you use it to build a sentence to describe a house to someone, and then you put the hammer down.
Exactly. It's just a bridge between isolated minds.
Yeah, the hammer itself doesn't fundamentally change the wood, it just helps you communicate your mental design. But then you step into the world of ancient metaphysical texts, and suddenly that hammer is no longer just describing the house.
No, not at all.
In this framework, you speak the word for house, and the walls physically, structurally assemble themselves around you. The language doesn't just describe reality, it actively alters it.
Which is terrifyingly powerful, honestly,
Right.
because it is the absolute definition of a metaphysical instrument.
Right.
We're dealing with a grammar that operates directly upon the speaker and the reader. It's not the speaker operating the grammar anymore.
And that is exactly what our stack of sources is focused on today.
Mhm.
We are exploring an ancient elder tongue known as Adar-im, or sometimes it's written with a vertical line through the middle, Adar-im.
Very dense source material.
Oh, incredibly dense, but deeply fascinating. We've got mythological glossaries, ancient philosophical codices, and the haunting lore surrounding an artifact called the Ledger of Gloaming Rock.
Yeah, that ledger is something else.
Our mission for this deep dive: to understand how this peculiar grammar physically and spiritually acts upon whoever interacts with it. Okay, let's unpack this, because I really want to know how a language actually manages to build a trap out of thin air.
Well, if you were to look behind me right now, just imagine a shifting, ethereal backdrop of ancient illuminated manuscripts overlapping with intricate star charts.
Okay, I can picture it.
That is the visual equivalent of what Adar-im feels like to study. It forces us to question the very nature of language itself.
Because it assumes the observer and the observed are connected.
Exactly. They are intimately, physically connected.
Okay.
And the specific words you use, they pull the structural strings of that connection.
So, to grasp how a language can actually alter reality, we first need to understand its fundamental building blocks, right?
We do.
Yeah.
We have to look at its specific alphabet.
But going through these sources, I noticed right away that in Adar-im, they aren't exactly letters. They are roots. 7 core roots that represent the foundational elements of existence.
Yeah, you have to completely abandon our usual ideas of nouns, verbs, and adjectives. Let's look at the first root to understand the mechanism here.
Okay.
The first root is dar. And the codices translate this not as a thing, but as a state, the wound that became a path.
Let's really look at the mechanics of that. The wound that became a path, that implies traversal,
Right.
You are taking a trauma, a physical or spiritual injury, and instead of it being a dead end, it becomes the literal road you walk on.
Taking that further, the next root is sur, which is defined as the blind eye that learned to see.
The witness.
Exactly. The texts frequently refer to it as the witness. It's the concept of a perception born out of an initial inability to perceive. Then we have kwev, meaning the veil that prevents mercy from hardening into judgment.
Going through my notes here, I want to bring in the next two because this is where I started to see a pattern.
Go for it.
We have mir, which the texts describe as the mirror that forgives by refusing illusion,
Yeah.
and then zal, which translates to the shadow debt that remembers promises.
And the final two complete the cycle. We have tib, which is the whole that exists only because it has been broken.
Wow.
And finally, none, the forgetting that makes room for birth.
Looking at this list of 7 roots, I'm comparing them less to letters of an alphabet and much more to like the fundamental forces of physics or elements on a periodic table.
That's a great way to think about it.
They aren't vocabulary words, they are base elements of reality. But what strikes me is that every single one of them is a contradiction.
Yes.
I mean, a wound is a dead end, but here it's a path. A hole implies something intact, but here it only exists because it was broken.
This raises a vital point about the mechanism of Adar-im. Why do these specific paradoxes matter?
Right, why not just normal words?
Because the human brain naturally rejects contradiction. We want things to be either whole or broken, not both simultaneously.
Yeah, it hurts to think about.
But these roots teach us that true metaphysical understanding requires holding two intensely conflicting ideas in the mind. at the exact same time.
So by making these paradoxes the literal base alphabet.
Adar-im ensures that you cannot even begin to speak without generating a massive amount of cognitive friction. You are forced to embrace contradiction just to form a thought.
Okay, so if these are the base elements, what happens when you smash them together like atoms in a particle collider?
Oh, you get a reaction.
Because if the root for wound path and the root for broken hole are forced into the same word, combining them has to create some sort of explosive metaphysical reaction.
The sources refer to that exact reaction as creating blade words.
Blade words, which is a remarkably aggressive term for vocabulary.
It really is. When these roots are synthesized, they form incredibly dense verbs. But they aren't meant for casual conversation.
Right.
They're designed to be spoken in a single sustained breath to enact a structural shift in reality.
Give us an example of how that looks in English.
Sure, so combining the mirror and the veil creates a verb that means to reflect what must not yet be seen.
Or I saw this one combining the shadow debt with the veil. The translation is to shatter the veil when the debt is ripe.
Yes, Sorotkavas.
It's the linguistic equivalent of calling in a metaphysical loan by aggressively breaking reality.
The codices highlight several profound examples. There's a blade word, Adar-im, that translates to walk the fracture without leaving a footprint. And another deeply unsettling one, Merriman, to know in a way that is painful because it is final.
I lingered on that one in the reading. To know in a way that hurts specifically because it is final.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Once you speak that verb, there is no unknowing it. You have structurally altered your own mind. But there's another blade word that I struggled with, zilbilin. The translation is, the soft bell that never rings, yet its silence bruises the air.
What's fascinating here is how it operates as a koan.
Koan.
Yeah, for those familiar with Zen Buddhism, a koan is a riddle or a paradox explicitly designed to break the mind's reliance on logic and intellect.
Right, like the sound of one hand clapping.
Exactly. The sources actually provide an Adar-im story to illustrate this mechanism. A monk spends years polishing a mirror until it is absolutely flawless.
Okay.
He asks his master what he sees in it. The master looks, says nothing, and then violently shatters the mirror.
Jeez.
The koan then asks the student, what is the sound of those broken pieces reflecting nothing?
Which completely short-circuits the brain. You can't logically answer that.
And the short circuit is the entire goal. The logic shatters, just like the physical mirror. These blade words cut entirely through your intellectualizing, rationalizing mind.
They force you to directly experience the raw reality of the concept.
Exactly. Rather than allowing you to safely sit back and just think about it from a distance.
I understand the psychological mechanism there, the breaking of logic, but I'm going to push back on the physical application.
Okay, push back.
If this blade word is a soft bell that never rings, how do you actually speak a silence that bruises the air?
Well,
Isn't language by definition fundamentally reliant on making a sound? How do you vocalize a silence that physically impacts the environment around you?
because speaking Adar-im isn't fundamentally about vocal cords or acoustics.
It's not.
No. The language acts upon reality simply by being observed or by encoding an intent. And because it doesn't require sound to alter reality, it can be written down.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It can be baked into the architecture of binding agreements, which moves us perfectly from the abstract philosophy of these koans into the highly practical and honestly terrifying application of this grammar in the physical world.
Because if a language alters reality just by being observed, it is the perfect tool for writing inescapable contracts.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the Ledger of Gloaming Rock.
The ledger is one of the most significant artifacts in our sources. It is a supernatural tracking system of spiritual and ancestral obligations that spans across multiple generations.
And it's written entirely in Adar-im.
Yes. It operates as a sprawling archive of debts that specific families owe to whatever entity or force lies beneath the earth.
Here is where the source material felt shockingly modern to me. Going through the mechanics of the ledger, it reads exactly like the ultimate predatory terms of service agreement.
Oh, that is a perfect comparison.
You know when you sign up for a new piece of software or an app and you scroll past 50 pages of dense legal jargon and just click I agree without reading a single word?
Because the system is designed to make reading it exhausting. We all just click the button to get to the destination.
But in the lore of Gloaming Rock, you don't even get a button to click. The physical house itself is the contract.
Yeah. Kavalan.
Let's break down the translated terms from the ledger. First, like you said, there's the concept of kavalan, the house. But in this grammar, the house isn't defined as a building with a roof.
No, it is defined as a boundary or a contract that precedes its signatories.
Every room in this estate is a legal clause. Every physical doorway, every threshold you cross, is a conjugation of a binding verb. You are legally agreeing to the terms of the debt simply by walking down the hallway.
It's an architectural trap built out of grammar. And once you are inside, you encounter the concept of zalo salt.
Which is usually a good thing, right?
In standard folklore, salt is traditionally used as a barrier to ward off evil spirits. But in the ledger, a ring of salt is not a protection at all. It is an acknowledgement of the shadow debt.
So you're actually paying up.
The text describes it as paying the house in grains of shadow weight.
So every time a resident pours salt, thinking they are protecting themselves, they're actually signing a promissory note. They're saying to the house, I see you and I acknowledge that I owe you.
They are participating in the upkeep of their own binding.
And what are they signing that promissory note with? This is the part that genuinely unnerved me.
The nib.
Dartib. The texts translate this term as the nib, as in the nib of a fountain pen. In a normal inheritance, the heir receives the estate, but here the heir becomes the pen.
The human being is literally the ink.
The ledger literally calls the human heir the unhealed grammatical wound that writes through the ledger. That changes the entire power dynamic of inheritance.
Completely.
You aren't getting a house, the house is consuming you. By taking the inheritance, the person becomes both the signature on the document and the scar tissue that binds the contract together.
The human is merely the mechanism the contract uses to perpetuate itself. And if you realize you are trapped and look for a way out, the grammar introduces mir osalan, the mirror.
The only surface in the entire house that cannot lie.
Right. But while it cannot lie, it can reverse. It shows you the contract from the perspective of the architecture.
Which is terrifying.
It reveals the reality that the physical house is the haunted, suffering entity. And you, the human walking through it, are merely a temporary term in its eternal contract.
Which necessitates the final and perhaps creepiest term in the ledger, Ser Eteros, the 13th guest.
Yes.
The sources are clear that this isn't a ghost haunting the dinner table, it is a grammatical necessity.
It is the witness whose presence is required to complete the sentence. 12 guests leave the legal clause unfinished.
So the arrival of the 13th guest is the punctuation mark that permanently closes the trap.
If we pull back from the Gothic horror elements of this lore, the Ledger of Gloaming Rock serves as an incredibly pertinent metaphor for you listening right now.
Oh, absolutely.
We all inherit invisible contracts from our ancestors. We inherit generational traumas, unspoken family expectations, societal debts.
These unseen ledgers define the boundaries of our personal houses long before we are even born.
Every day, we are crossing thresholds and living out the clauses of contracts we never consciously agreed to sign.
We are acting as the scar tissue of our family histories. We are paying that salt tax, acknowledging the shadow debt every single time we unconsciously repeat a destructive ancestral pattern.
It's very real.
That is an incredibly heavy realization. If we are trapped inside these metaphysical contracts, wandering through houses built of blade words that define our limitations, how do we break the lease? How do we get out?
Well, the sources don't just leave us in the trap. They provide the escape mechanism, which brings us to the core philosophy of Adar-im, the philosophy of reversal.
Okay, good. I need an out.
You asked earlier how someone vocalizes a silence.
Yeah.
You do it by fundamentally changing the direction the language flows. In this grammar, there's a mechanism known as reverse operation.
The sources call it the backward name.
Yes. When you speak a word in reverse, when you use its backward name, it immediately stops being a label that defines a thing, and it transforms into a question that the named thing is forced to answer.
Okay, let's make this concrete, because this feels like the master key to everything we've discussed today. Turning a label into a question. Give me a real-life equivalent of how a backward name functions.
Let's use the analogy of a toxic workplace, or even severe imposter syndrome. Imagine you walk into a boardroom, and the invisible structure of that room labels you as inadequate or subordinate.
Right, you just feel it in the air.
As long as you accept that label, you are bound by the contract of that room. You are speaking its grammar. But to use the backward name means you stop accepting the label and you force the room to justify its authority.
Oh, I see.
You mentally reverse the flow of power by asking, why does this structure require me to feel inadequate in order for it to function? You aren't questioning yourself anymore. You are interrogating the room.
You force the structure to explain why it's there. You strip it of its declarative power. This ties perfectly into what the codices call the turning of the great branch. It's this mythic event where the flow of power stops moving upward to feed the external authorities, the upper branches of the canopy, and instead reverses, flowing all the way back down to the individual. They call the individual the sovereign root.
The overarching system has been extracting power from the roots to maintain its own canopy. Using the backward name forces those heavy branches to bend back down toward the soil.
Reclaiming the power.
It strips oppressive, inherited structures of their assumed power by demanding they justify their right to exist. Claiming your sovereignty isn't about fighting the system with a physical sword. It's about fundamentally shifting your spiritual grammar.
Shifting your spiritual grammar. Instead of making a statement of identity like, I am inherently bound by this trauma, you reverse the operation.
Yes.
The trauma is no longer a noun that defines you. It becomes a question the universe has to answer.
Which brings us to the absolute core doctrine of the Adar-im language. It is a single phrase that acts as the ultimate blade word for liberation. The Adar-im phrasing is, Ina lamandariskin, inequal mermen, tana inem.
And the English translation of that doctrine is, the path of the mind breaks. You do not.
The path of the mind breaks. You do not. This phrase is the culmination of the entire metaphysical system.
It all leads here.
The seven roots, the paradoxes, the ledgers, they all point here. The ancient texts tell us that true realization only happens when the mirror stops lying, and the perceiver finally recognizes that they are the exact same root as the thing they are perceiving.
Like a loop.
Identity isn't a straight line marching from the past into the future. It is a recursion, a loop feeding back into itself.
I want to just sit with that translated phrase for a second for you listening right now. The path of the mind breaks. You do not. Think about all the rigid mental frameworks, the logical plans, the deep anxieties we build our entire lives around.
They're fragile.
When those plans inevitably shatter when the mirror breaks, just like in the monk's canyon, we usually feel like we're fundamentally breaking as human beings.
Right, we feel destroyed.
But this ancient grammar insists that no, you aren't breaking. Your mind's path broke. The temporary logic failed. But your true essence, your sovereign root, remains completely untouched by the collapse of the structure. You endure.
It is the ultimate form of liberation from the ledger. You realize that you were never actually the contract. You were the light reading the contract.
Right.
The haunted house, the shadow dead, the soul. They were all just language, architecture built of words. And once you fully understand the mechanics of the language, you have the power to rewrite it, or simply refuse to speak it altogether.
So if we step all the way back from the mythological glossaries and the supernatural ledgers of Gloaming Rock, what is the core takeaway for you right here in your actual everyday life?
Yeah, how do we apply this?
It means that the language we use, both internally when we are ruthlessly talking to ourselves and externally when we engage with the world, it doesn't just innocently describe our reality. It literally builds the house we live in.
It does.
We are constantly, daily, signing invisible ledgers with our self-criticisms, our limiting beliefs, and our silences. Every single time we accept a negative label without questioning it, we are paying the salt tax to a structure that was designed to hold us back.
And that leaves us with a final, deeply personal question to consider.
Let's hear it.
If exploring Adar-im teaches us that language can be a blade capable of structurally shifting reality, what are the unspoken blade words currently operating in your own life? What is the invisible generational contract you've been signing every day without realizing it?
Consider the deepest fear or the heaviest obligation that is currently binding you to a path you didn't choose. What is its backward name? And what would happen to the structure of your reality if you finally gathered the courage to stand at the threshold and speak it in reverse?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the labels, keep exploring the spaces between the words, and remember the hammer doesn't just build the house. Sometimes you have to use it to shatter the mirror. We'll catch you next time.